Battle over new voter ID laws is spreading across the country ahead of the presidential election. In state after state, Republican legislative majorities and governors are passing laws calling for stricter ID requirements at the polls. Civil liberties groups accuse them of targeting minorities, the elderly, as well as the poor. Well, here's the lay of the land. Right now, 31 states require voters to show some form of ID before casting a ballot. About half require photo IDs. The states you see in orange, they have strict photo ID laws, meaning that if a registered voter cannot provide a government-issued photo identification card, that person cannot vote on Election Day. Instead, the voter can cast a provisional ballot that would be counted only if the voter can produce a photo ID within days. Now, supporters say the new laws protect the integrity of the election process by eliminating voter fraud. Plus, they also argue that showing photo ID is an acceptable part of everyday life. I'm joined by NAACP President and Chairman Ben Jealous. Ben, thank you for joining us here. You're kicking off this voter registration drive here in Atlanta, but it's a nationwide campaign. You have compared these new voter ID laws to Jim Crow. And there's some people who say, wait a minute, that sounds a bit extreme, that this is a scare tactic. Why do you make that kind of comparison?
Sure. First of all, let's start with the fact that we're actually still dealing with Jim Crow voter suppression laws. These ex-felon disenfranchisement bans still exist in several states, just put back on the books in Florida, pushing 500,000 voters off the roll, 250,000 blacks off the roll. Were put in place as a wave after the Civil War for the express purpose of suppressing the black vote. So we are still dealing with Jim Crow voter laws right now. But these voter ID laws are like Jim Crow because they put the first financial barriers between somebody and casting their vote that we've seen since we got rid of the poll tax.
How so when you say financial barriers? What
Somebody has to actually pay to get their ID. Or they have to pay to get the documents to get their ID. The state may say, well, the document, the ID is free, but you got to go get your birth certificate. You have to pay for that. We have a doctor in rural South Carolina, Dr. Williams, has belonged to the association for her family for 2 or 3 generations. She spent thousands of her dollars and hundreds of her own hours hiring lawyers, working with her patients in her medical practice to help them get IDs. Why? Because these are rural folks born to midwives, too poor to own a car. Their midwife didn't make sure that they got a birth certificate when they were born decades ago. They've been too poor to get a car, so they don't have a current driver's license, and they're literally getting them documentation just so that they can vote.
Well, help me understand this, because documentation, ID, photo ID, it's a normal, regular part of life living here in the United States. Isn't there assistance, though, for folks who they can comply with these laws and they can actually vote? I mean, groups like the NAACP can help people actually get that kind of money, the funds, to produce an ID.
Well, just think about that, right? We're back to the NAACP having to help people get the money to vote again. It's insane. We're a free country. In every Western democracy, voting is free. In fact, in places like the UK, it follows you where you go, like Selective Service does here. We can actually expand the vote and secure it at the same time, but that's not what they're trying to do. This problem that they say that we have of people impersonating voters, that's why you need an ID. The Republican Lawyers Association did the most extensive survey. They found 350 cases out of tens of millions, actually hundreds of millions of votes cast over 15 years. Talk maybe 20 cases a year. Most of the states who are putting them in place actually haven't had a problem in the past several cycles. And when they've had a problem, it's 1 or 2 people in that state. So you have to ask yourself, why are you making it harder for millions and millions of people to vote to stop maybe 25 cases in the entire country in an entire year? And the question is the impact. And the impact is that we know that, for instance, 3/4 of young black men in some cities in the Midwest don't currently have an up-to-date valid ID. So of course we're saying to folks, go out and get your ID. We also know that's going to be much harder for them to vote than it ever has been before.
People inside the Obama administration are very concerned that they don't have the same kind of enthusiasm moving forward when it comes to black voters and Latina voters.
Sure.
Is this a campaign, an effort to get people to vote, or is it a campaign essentially to vote for Obama? Is this a re-election campaign?
We don't work for this candidate or that candidate. We work for people to make sure that they can vote. We were out here fighting voter suppression when it was Democrats doing it. Now we're fighting voter suppression when in most cases it's Republicans doing it. You know, you have folks out there who clearly have a very partisan goal on the other side. They have targeted so-called battleground states like Florida, like Georgia, like North Carolina, like Pennsylvania, trying to push these through. We saw Governor Scott Walker first push through voter ID, then turn around and say he was shutting down DMVs in 10 of the poorest areas of the state. You know, all trying to get that done before the vote for his recall. And now we see this big push. This is happening before this presidential. The NAACP is 100 years. And what we've seen in that 100 years is that whenever we have a massive expansion of the vote for black people in this country, it's followed by a backlash. It happened 50 years before we started, right after the Civil War. It happened 50 years ago during the Civil Rights movement. And now it's happened again following the breaking of the color barrier at the White House by the largest, most diverse presidential election
so
ever.
You're saying there's a backlash at this moment. What effectively before
and I'm
November?
Saying that we're fighting people who are partisan, but we're not partisan.
Before November, what can you actually do? You know, the Justice Department is obviously taking on some of these voter ID laws, but before November, is it better? Is it more effective to simply try to help people get their IDs, or are you trying to change the law?
Before November, we are fighting attempts to change the law wherever it happens. Before November, we're pushing DOJ to invalidate unconstitutional laws and laws that violate the Voting Rights Act across the country. But most importantly, before November, we are signing up as many people as possible to vote and getting them to commit to turn out and vote, because the reality is that, look, 40–50% of this country in a given year who are signed up to vote may not vote. And so that we know that we can overcome these hurdles if we push more people to get signed up to vote, we push more people to turn out and vote. That's what folks can do. That's what we're asking them to do.
All right.